Welcome to a riveting episode of the Stop Doing Stupid Stuff podcast, where your hosts Tim Keefe and Andreas Wieman dive into the pressing issues of employee engagement and the challenges businesses face with return to office mandates. Today's discussion revolves around two enlightening articles, the first by Gabe Burke in Barron's, exploring research-based insights into workplace trends, and the second by Justin Wright on LinkedIn, detailing the 7 soft skills essential for successful leadership. In this episode, Tim and Andreas dissect how these topics intersect and impact the corporate world. They also spotlight the influential Stop Doing Stupid Stuff Turista book, the sponsor of today's podcast. Turista offers tools and tricks for travelers, which tie into broader discussions about workplace strategies and personal development. Join us as we navigate the complexities of modern work environments and uncover practical advice for making informed decisions that avoid common workplace blunders.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to an exciting edition. I mean, every edition is exciting. I don't know why I just said that. To Stop Doing Stupid Stuff podcast. So I am here with my co-host, Tim Keefe. And Tim, I'm getting ready to go off. I'm pretty excited about these topics today. Let me pause there and give you some airtime to introduce what we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah, so continuing on our conversation about employee engagement, and this is all headline news that's going on right now as companies are still struggling with return to office mandates, et cetera. So we have 2 articles that we think are complementary in talking about what happens in this space. One is a really interesting article that was published in Barron's this week, written by a gentleman named Gabe Butler. And what's fascinating about it, it starts to look at real research rather than just a lot of gut level instinct about what's happening. And the second article is an interesting one that was published in LinkedIn. I'm sorry, that was Gabe Burke, my apologies. And then another one that was just published in LinkedIn. And this is by, let me make sure I get it right.
Justin Wright.
Justin Wright. And it's an article on 7 soft skills of successful leaders. And people may go, well, what do they have to do with each other? And I would argue they have everything to do with each other. But before we dive into it, let me talk about our sponsor for today's podcast. So today's sponsor is the book SDSS, as in Stop Doing Stupid Stuff, Turista. A great book for those who travel. It's part of our SDSS library. It's really filled with great tools and tricks for both experienced and newbie travelers. If you're interested at all, please look in the description below for the link to Amazon where the book is available. And if you happen to be in Manila in a few weeks coming up, there's going to be a book signing with all 3 authors there. I think it's going to be in Makati, but we'll have the description of the location and the date and time in the description as well. So with that, let's get into the content for today's podcast. Sir.
Yeah, no, it's pretty awesome to have all 3 authors in one place in the world at the same time signing books. That's pretty exciting. And hey,
Yeah,
it's
that'll be
cool
fun.
that, Stop Doing Stupid Stuff. We have the original book that came out that you and I co-authored. We have the soft skills that came out, which we're going to be talking about today, right? That I authored and kind of oriented towards individual progression and business or organizational nonprofit. There's a lot of applicability to it, but Teresa, there's a lot of travel and business too, but even in pleasure, it's a great book. I've read it cover to cover, I would say a couple of times now. I'm going to say a couple of times to make sure I'm as accurate as possible, because I know the authors will, come at me for being inaccurate, but amazing book. Please check it out. And if you're in Makati in the Philippines, in February, please check out the book signing. Will be really great to get some endorsements from the author. Really exciting. So soft skills, and I think you did a good tee up on the articles, Tim. And here's what I'm going to say from in overall view. There is a huge, and as we've been talking about for several months now, if you go back and listen to our prior Stop Doing Stupid Stuff podcast, back to the office was inevitable. The issue is how it's being executed and the kind of logic that's being either publicly displayed or maybe covertly not being publicly displayed, but something else is saying, yeah, this is why we're going back to the office, when in reality it's a different rationale. Not saying it's right, wrong, or indifferent. The key is, if you're going to have people come back into the office, what is going to be attractive in today's environment to get people to come back, and then not only come back, but be productive. Just because they badge swipe in, that doesn't mean that they're productive. And so I think there's a false premise of decision making right now, right? Of people saying, oh, well, if we're back in the office pre-COVID, we were super productive. I'm like, well, first of all, there's a ton of different variables that were in play that have completely changed in today's environment. So if you're assuming a static kind of equation there on productivity, this is not going to go well for you, and it's
Yeah.
going to deteriorate very, very quickly. So I guess that's maybe a good talking point first, Tim. So I mean, what
Well,
do you think on that?
well, I think that's the gnarly part for, and I mean, there's a couple of ways to look at this whole problem, right? I think there's the what I would call the micro piece, which is an individual company that has either a lease or they own a building that, in a metro area or wherever, and they're sitting there and they're looking at empty desks. And the
Right.
question is, how do I get I've got some really interesting questions to make. I may have a loan on this building, I may have a 20-year lease, and I can't get out from underneath these costs. So that's one thing I think that you're dealing with, is that I've got a cost and I'm trying to make that cost productive in my environment. I also have the next step up, but more of the macro thing, is the social economic impact of return to office. And I think, and this is not a small thing. I mean, you take a look at San Francisco, for example, where office occupancies are hovering around 40%. It's a big problem because now
Yeah.
all those businesses that serve those businesses, whether they're the lunch, Uber drivers, all these people that made their living as a result of the ebb and flow of people in and out of these office spaces, have been severely disrupted. And of course, and then within the next layer, I'll put the civic side on it. Like here in San Francisco, we have a massive shortfall in budget. Well, the biggest part of that is the payroll tax, because people aren't working in the city. And therefore, a huge part of the revenue stream that was in place for a very long time is now not there.
Yeah.
And so that impacts things like, oh, well, we're going to have to reduce our public transportation services because we don't have the money and we don't have the fares because people aren't riding on them. So there's less services, which means less people riding on them. It's kind of a little, and that's the doom loop scenario that everybody's talking about. Now, I do believe, and I think you and I sit there and we say, if we back it all the way up to the first point, which is, if companies believe that return to office is important, and there are companies that have taken the other route, right? Like have gone completely virtual. They really think that that works for them. And again, I think that's the key. It's going to be different for every organization and almost down to the
Agreed.
individual, what works. But if I'm sitting there saying, and maybe San Francisco is willing to give me big tax breaks for bringing people into the office, I've got some strong encouragement, I want to see my city be successful. How can I do that? I'm going to mandate everybody come to the office. Okay. And I mean, we just, not that it's one of our articles, but a couple of weeks ago, AT&T did this. And those of you may have seen some of the stories, they didn't even have space for everybody. And people were sitting in their cars in the parking lot to get credit for their day at the office.
Yeah.
So, obviously I think you got to say, why are you coming to the office? And we all say, oh, it's because we learn from each other. It's more collaboration. It's more, of that. And you go, great. What are you doing to actually make that real? Are you taking the time? This could be a great time for training. This could be a great time for team building. But that means you got to have a plan, and you got to build team building programs, and you've got to build, how do we improve communication, and maybe even strategy sessions these would be good for. But what we're hearing, and it's documented in some of these articles, is, hey, it's not that. It's attendance. We need people to come into the office. We don't want you to badge swipe, so we're going to time you in and out, right? So you just can't come in at 8 and leave at 8:15. You've got to come in at 8 and leave, by 5, or no earlier than 5. And okay, then people are just sitting there at the office, and and I hear this personally all the time, and I don't want to make personal anecdotes the whole story, but we've all heard it, which is, I commute to the office, I badge swipe in, I sit at my desk, and I do exactly at my desk what I was doing at home. I'm on conference calls, or I'm on Zoom meetings, or I'm working virtually. So that gets to the point where people start to burn out, right? Like, I've given up, instead of sitting at home and having my,
well, exactly. It's not just burnout. I want to make this distinction real quick here, also because you talked for like 10 minutes straight. But you can make this. I know, that's why I'm intervening now. Our listeners are gonna be like, WTF, these guys do a podcast together. This is part of this is why we're such close friends, because we can talk like this to each other. But you have a really good point here, and I want to make the like pause for the I don't know, mental sync for our listeners of it's not just it's people, a person. And here's the other thing too. You got to get back to individualism and personalization. Everybody in marketing will tell you, oh, if you want more customers, you got to go for personalized marketing, personalized services. And, I'm like, I agree with that. I agree. What about your employees? Oh, no, they're just a bunch of drones and you just tell them what to do because you pay them. I mean, they don't literally say that, but their actions sometimes feel
Oh,
like
yes.
that. So, but here's the point I want to make though with what you were saying. If you're a worker, right? Let's say you're a mid manager and there's a back to office mandate and everything that you just said, you have more time that you're commuting that you're not getting compensated for because your pay rate's the same as it was when you work at home. So you're losing that time away from family, activities, whatever your passion is, right? Then you get there and you're doing the exact same thing. In a lot of cases, you're actually probably being less productive because you have a bit of distraction that's going on there. And you want to make sure that not only are you looking at bad swipe, but you have visibility with the important people so they know that you have visual recognition that you're in office. And so if you add all of that together and then you look at just the productivity side of that, most times you're going to see that they're less contributive and less productive on quantity and quality. But think about the person. Think about the
Mhm.
message that's being sent to that person of saying, we care about you this much that we're going to make you do all of these things. You're going to be less productive when you get in here. Think about the mental toll that that has on that person and then measure the level of quantity and quality that has to be in balance, right, of that individual person. And if they're a team, if they're mid management and they're responsible for a team, the reciprocating effects that it's going to have on that team. I think we really, really need to look at the individuals and the psychological side of return to office. I don't think that is being considered whatsoever in the decision-making
Well,
process today.
not that we're seeing. I mean, let's be honest. We're getting, and this is what I liked about the Gabe Burke article, right? Like, it's not just a bunch of individual opinions, as important as those may be, but also, he's actually quoting studies that are being done by reputable academic institutions that do research for a living and that are now starting to say, okay, what does this look like? And one of the things that I think came out of the article that I think is really important is that you've got to have a clear, like we keep saying, you got to have a clear and effective reason for this, for the change. Now, people would argue like, hey, we're just going back to what we were doing. Yeah, well, whether we like it or not, probably the biggest social experiment in the history of mankind, well, at least in modern history, taught a lot of people that no, they don't have to go to the office and to be very effective in their work. And there's a lot of other things that are going on here in that people are struggling. I mean, one of the things that we're also seeing is the whole problem with a lot of work is that even if they go to the office, we have the wonderful Qualtrics report that we quote a lot. That's just about a year old. That globally we're seeing employee engagement at 30%.
Ah, the Gallup
Well,
report. The
yeah, the
Gallup
Gallup
report.
report. Yeah,
Exactly.
and
Exactly.
so even if they were going to the office, how productive are they? And again, we go back to what are you measuring? Just attendance? Well, attendance doesn't drive revenue, doesn't drive customer satisfaction, at least not that I'm aware of. But, how do we drive engagement? And I think this is probably as big or even a bigger problem. Now, if the engagement can be driven as a result of, a compelling, let's say, let's be fictional for a minute. Let's say that you and I were running a company and we had 500 employees and we had an empty building in downtown San Francisco and everybody's working at home. Of those 500 people, probably 400 maybe are still within the commuting range of the company, and the other 100 have
Right.
probably done whatever. They've moved to different places, but
They're
they're still
outside the
being very,
radius.
yeah, they're still being very productive and very effective.
Hmm.
And often they may be our most productive and most senior and most qualified people. And also, if we make life uncomfortable for them, those are the ones that have the best options to leave, right?
Yep.
Because when you put pressure on people and they're uncomfortable, they start looking at other options. Now, even worse, I think one of the things that happened and was happening before the pandemic, but accelerated through the pandemic, was you have these people that are retired in place, low engagement, quiet quitting, guess what? What they're really doing is they're working for their healthcare.
Yep.
And they're not working because they're interested in the job. They're interested because they want a healthcare that can take care of them or take care of their family. And what's the bare minimum that I need to do to keep this job?
While they're
And
doing a side gig.
that's right. And they're
Yep.
getting their intellectual stimulation and their excitement about what they do in their lives from their side gig, whether it's TikTok reaction videos, which I find fascinating that this is even a thing, or it's somebody who's writing code, building applications, creating a new game, writing a book. I mean, this is stuff now that people can do. And I think there's an opportunity to kind of lift that up within an organization because, and not to, we'll brag a little bit. I think here at Transform CX, we are really trying to lean into what are the buttons that light people up. I mean, not light people up and make them angry or upset, but light people up in that they're engaged and they're excited about what they're doing. And sometimes it may not be directly on your strategy plan as a business, but great example. I think a great example are the books. We're encouraging the people in our organization to be authors around the things that they're excited about. And
exactly.
people would say, but that's taking time away from their work. And I go, you know what? If I can take 10% of the time away from their quote work, and they go from 40% engaged to 90% engaged, I've won, right? And they've won.
And think about it like this. This is, again, everything in my head is just a math equation. So if you're telling me your previous scenario, go ahead. I know you want to make a snarky comment.
I was gonna cut you off with something snarky, but I think you'll take care of it by yourself.
Yeah, exactly. So and we also finish each other's sentences, by the way. But in your scenario, though, previously you were like, well, look, a lot of people have a full-time primary, let's call it the primary job, so they have benefits, right? They have healthcare, they have whatever they need to have there. But the level of productivity or contribution that they're getting is just good enough not to get fired, flying under the radar, as I call it.
Yep.
Now, if you go back and look at the level of engagement and productivity to the latter scenario you just described too, where you say, oh, well, they're not focusing on their primary. You know what? Because we measure outcomes and we measure what is the real goal and what is the strategy. And if you're getting a 95% level of contribution for 32 hours a week, right? Versus a 50% contribution for 40 hours a week out of the person who's just there to get benefits, guess what? The 32-hour a week with the 95% contribution, that 5% that is going towards their passion project or something internally that's probably still helping your company in some way, shape, or form, organization, you're miles ahead of the competition. And that's the thing, is that the circumstances in today's environment do not match what happened pre-COVID. If you're using a static assumption of pre-COVID, read our book, Stop Doing Stupid Stuff, because guess what you're doing? Stupid. You're doing stupid stuff.
No, but and again, and I get I get these, as I was describing earlier in the podcast, you've got these internal pressures, which are financial in some places. Companies are looking at empty desks and go, what the hell am I going to do with this? And some companies are starting to sublet that space. There's actually a kind of a boom in the shared workspace, right? Because as people are working side gigs or whatever, they are interested at times in getting out of the house or getting into a different environment or meeting with a bunch of people, some collaborators. Hey, can we get together and talk about this? But they're not interested in, getting up and getting on the 610, at the Stuart Manor Long Island Railroad Station every day. That was my father for his entire career. And you kind of go, okay, so I've got that. I've also got the societal pressures of, cities really struggling and how can I get back? And I think this is where I'm hoping, some of our new leadership is going to be starting to say, to your point, let's be different. Like if I've got
let's find solutions. Let's find solutions. So I think I know where you're going, but I want to just plug real quick. Gabe Burke, the author of the Barron's article that we'll link to. I want to give him props. One, his position, he works for Accenture, but he's in the real estate and workplace solutions consulting practice. Solutions. If you're going to take away something from this podcast, start thinking solution minded of what the current variables are that you're facing today, and try to match that up against what your business plan and strategy is. So Gabe is probably a really good resource to reach out to and get some advice on this, given his specialty and his practical focus. But he's got one quote here I want to be able to reference him on, or quote him on, I guess. My advice to corporate leadership is this: you are experts at making the business case for your product or service. Now make one to your people for why they need to be in the office. What Tim is getting at right here, and I cut Tim off, so I want to throw it back to him in a second, is exactly what I think Gabe is coming from, the position he's coming from. Go find a solution. Guess what? If cities are losing population because more people are commuting, or not commuting, but they're retreating to the suburbs now, and you have suburban swell because you can work from home there. All right. Well, the problem is not just tell people to get in the office. What can you do to attract people back in the office? Oh, the other problem is you got a bunch of square footage that's unoccupied and empty desk. Okay. Well, what can we do? We don't need all of this space. What do we need to do to occupy as much commercial space as possible? And then what do we got to do to work with experts to solution a live, work, play environment, even if it's on a temporary basis, to attract people in? Maybe I should go talk to the local businesses that are within walking distance of my facility too, and say, hey, I got this idea, but this isn't my specialty. What do you guys think? What can we do to help get more people here
And
so we can give you more business too? Start talking to each other
right,
and start
right.
collaborating and come up with a solution.
Well, and that I think is a big part of it, right? That collaboration. And unfortunately, at least on the outside, right? And I'm sure some of these decisions have taken weeks, months of, internal battling to come to. But when it just comes across as like a mandate, thou shalt. And here's the underlying reality. Like, okay, I'm a CEO, I can say that. And then I retreat back into my corner office and close the door and hope that, nobody comes and bashes it down. What has happening in reality is like the manager who's got 25, 30 people working for them who are all going, you know what? I'm not coming back to the office. This
Yep.
isn't working for me. I'm going to start looking for a new job. And that manager is going to do what? You know what they're going to do? They're going to say, oh, whoa, whoa, whoa. I tell you what, we're going to create an exception for you, right? So that, because I can't afford to lose you, because at the end of the day, I'm still being held accountable for
Right.
productivity. And if my bosses are somehow making it difficult for me to keep my best people, how am I going to deliver what I need to do at the end of the day? And guess what's going to happen to those managers? They're going to start looking for other jobs.
Exactly.
And this
It's
is
a domino
literally what's
effect.
happening. Absolutely. And the people with the best skills, the people that you need the most, they're the ones who have the most options. And you've got it, to your point, it's an individual, what works for the individual. Some people like to go to the office. I mean, I've been there. Like sometimes people, it creates that separation be home and work. I know my daughters, if I ask them on any given day, they say they like the office, but they also like it when they have their days where they can work from home. So I think there's a good wrap up. I just want to again go back to our, and we didn't talk a lot about specifically Justin and his soft skills piece, but I do think that, Justin Wright in the LinkedIn article also will include below, is really important because it does that too, right? You've got to have empathy. You've got to have effective and clear communication, not just here is the mandate. You can't be the town crier. You've got to be a
Right.
communicator. You've got to have a reason. And if you don't, you got to step back and go, what am I doing? And why am I doing it?
Well,
So that's my
that's
2 cents on this whole
yeah.
thing.
Just one last comment on that, and then I want to give it to you. But yeah, my rationale for sharing Gabe's quote was to segue in and give Justin props of saying, hey, here you got to effectively communicate to your people why they got to return to the office. And guess what? Here is a great starter blueprint from Justin Wright on what you should do to help ease that in. So the reason we chose these articles is that they are linked together. So if you want quick advice, you didn't want to listen to Tim and I, go back and forth the entire podcast. If you just listen to the beginning, fast forward to the end, read Gabe's article, and then immediately go to Justin's article and figure out how you can link the two and apply them together to help with your return to office strategy.
Excellent. Yeah. And thanks, everybody. So please, if you can, subscribe, link, take time, give us feedback on what we're doing. We always want to do it better, but we're not stopping. We think this is important, and it's an important part of what we're doing.
Yep. Yep,
Okay, with that,
agreed.
I'd like to, again, go back to our sponsor for today. I kind of screwed up the announcement earlier, so let me get it right this time. Our sponsor is Stop Doing Stupid Stuff, the Teresa version. The authors are Arlene Durana, Charisse Wildryer, and Len Manzano, three extraordinary professional businesswomen, but also very, very experienced international travelers. And I think what they're offering here in the book, although there's a lot of people out there who write tips for travel, this is one of the best I've ever seen. I think it really gives a comprehensive view, whether you're highly experienced or this is your once in a lifetime bucket list trip and you really want to make sure you avoid the problems that can ruin a trip.
Yep.
So again, with that, Stop Doing Stupid Stuff, the Teresa version, available on Amazon. And we will put a link in the description with the upcoming book signing where all three authors will be together in the Philippines. I believe it's going to be either in Metro Manila or Makati, and we'll have the details associated with it. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Andreas, thanks for being here, partner. It's always a great pleasure to spend time with you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We appreciate all the listeners.